my friend.
Hare Krishna. Invite you all just to sort of just arrive, to be honest, just settle into the circle, settle into the Sangha of where we're at. Just feel your bodies on the chair and just notice the breath in your body. And as we sit here together, invite Shri Guru Garanga and all our saints, our acharyas, to give us the inspiration in our heart to ask questions, explore, and then for us to open our hearts to receive what's sort of given within this Sangha today. Hare Krishna. Thank you.
Hare Krishna. Thank you so much. And pranam to all of you. Welcome from New Zealand. Here I am in my last full day here. And tomorrow traveling back to Argentina again. So very happy to be sharing with you. We have been having very nice days with the devotees here. And mostly discussing, as you may have known, the third verse of Shikshastakam, the golden rule of the Golden Lord. So still amazed at how much there is in those few small, quote-unquote, small lines of that verse. In one sense, it's the shorter verse of the whole Shikshastakam, right? But so much is there to unpack, to discover, to embrace, to live, to practice. So we're having a pretty much wondrous experience of astonishment as the verse unfolds before our eyes. So we're happy to have the chance of sharing with the local community here about it, as well as other Q&As we have had these days. And well, here we are having our weekly satsang, confrontation with the truth. And confrontation is not a bad word, don't forget. It's just putting in front of us, confront, and directing our attention, being present and attentive to what's real, to what's truth. And that's basically what Mahaprabhu is talking about in that third verse of Shikshastakam, right? He's so present, so much turning his attention, samukyata, in the words of Jiva Goswami, like turning your face fully in the direction of the truth, that in the eyes of Mahaprabhu, the whole reality becomes alive and starts to speak to him and becomes guru, grass, tree, everything. So this is a weekly experiment, a weekly laboratory that we have crafted, trying to somehow or other increase our samukyata, our turning toward the sweet absolute, who is always and everywhere present. So we're happy to be with all of you. And before we start, I see a few raised hands. Just a brief reminder that I will try to share at the end, but in case I forget, as you know, we have adjusted the timing during the last 3 weeks because I'm in New Zealand, and New Zealand has its own unique time zone, or they will think that all of the rest of the world had their own unique time zone, and it's fine. But also trying to keep it New Zealanders user-friendly, we will try to keep this timing from the next week onward, though I will be outside of New Zealand. So I hope that for most of you is sustainable, so we can also extend a brotherly, sisterly, friendly invitation to our New Zealanders, brothers and sisters, for them to also be able, because if not, it's too early for them here. And we beg our forgiveness to our Indian brothers and sisters, since for them it will be too late now. It's not possible to encompass them all, but we may take turns throughout the year, maybe, so it's sustainable for everyone. So let's say it again. Welcome, and yeah, let's address whatever questions or sharing themes you may have. So let's go to Jiva and Prabhu. Not from the UK.
From Ireland.
From Ireland. I'm learning my lessons the hard way, but I'm learning them. Welcome, Jiva. Nice to see you.
And that's Maharaj pronounced to everyone. Maharaj, in your questions and answers to the first Shishastikam, you mentioned, which quite intrigued me, the one of the regulative principles, which was no meat eating. So
that's not the regulative principle.
Oh, no meat eating. But you always say dive deep as we can into a basic subject. So, and I started to think, why don't we eat meat? Is it a moral principle or a spiritual virtue? Is it to do with karma? And as you pointed out, some of the most compassionate people in the world are actually meat eaters, and maybe some people who are quite aggressive can be vegetarians. No meat eating is meant to be a sort of pillar of compassion. So that was sort of my question, really. What is no meat eating, and what does it curtail?
Yeah, the immediate thing that comes to my mind was this famous story of Srila Bhakti Pramod Puri Maharaj. He had one Western disciple that eventually it came to Srila Puri Maharaj's ears that he was offending the Vaishnavas. He was mistreating some devotees in a very unhealthy way, violent way. So he called this devotee, Srila Puri Maharaj, and he told him, some years ago, you coming from the West, you were eating meat. And you stopped eating meat, which is great. But now you have become a Vaishnava meat eater, no? By offending them. So I will prefer that you go back to eat meat. That's even worse. What you are doing now, it's even worse. So in one sense, for me, that situation sets the tone of what we are talking about here. No? Because again, I can be an impeccable vegetarian, vegan, whatever, fruitarian, breatharian, but I can be violent in so many directions in my life. So, and that's why I interrupted you in your question. And sorry for doing that, Jivan. And when you say we have the regulative principle of no meat eating, I say, no, that's not the regulative principle. Because that's not the regulative principle. The regulative principle is ahimsa. Meat eating is a symptom of ahimsa, should be. But the regulative principle, I mean, these four regulative principles, as we call them, they come from the Srimad Bhagavatam. These are four pillars of Dharma, as they are described in the Bhagavatam, and they are described as ahimsa, socham, tapas, and satyam. Non-violence, cleanliness or purity, austerity or introspection, if you want to use the word tapas as for what it is, and satyam, truthfulness. So those are the four regulative principles, if you want to strictly talk about. And no meat eating, no gambling, no illicit sex, no intoxication is a symptom that represents the principle, but it's not the whole principle. Because as you say, I can be a vegetarian and I can be so violent. I may not go to the local casino to gamble, but I may be so untruthful in so many ways. And so on and so forth. No? That's why I personally feel we need so much elaboration on this idea of the four regulative principles and not be reductionistic and just limit them to one single practice that encompasses the whole thing, because that's not the case. Again, I may not go to the casino, but by me lying to myself and to others in so many ways. I may abstain from certain substances, but may be intoxicated with social media, with pratishta, with so many things, and so on and so forth. Again, and I try to elaborate on that in the book, in Radical Personalism. There's a whole section dedicated to the four regulative principles and trying to unpack their implications. And even I remember we added a fifth one, and I remember we did a whole podcast with Namras about it, and I talked on the book as well, which is social media, how to deal with social media. That's a whole new category that has to be inaugurated, and that's not in Shastra because there was no Instagram in the Vedic times. But now you have to open that category, because if we don't openly speak about it, we may be breaking all the 4 regulative principles through our engagement with social media. But nobody knows about it. It's between me and my pocket, right? So we have to remain sensitive to the necessities of the times, and unfold and unpack and articulate all the things accordingly. So going back to your question of what's meat eating, again, just to clarify, the principle is no meat eating. As we said, the principle is ahimsa. And as I like to always say, no meat eating is a negative way of describing what you are doing. And sometimes that's a little bit strange. If you ask a devotee, I know that some devotees, not all Gaudiya Vaishnavas, but certain devotees, especially coming from certain particular affiliation, may over-identify with the 4 regulative principle as the main thing of their practice, which sincerely has nothing to do with the main thing of bhakti. It's not the 4 regulative principle. That's some civilized code for human behavior, as the yamas and niyamas of the yoga tradition, which I'm not saying they're bad. Of course, they're preliminary warming up to embrace bhakti from a commonsensical perspective, human perspective. But again, they need to be unpacked. The principle is no meat eating. The principle is ahimsa, but still that's described in a negative way. Non-violence, no meat eating. Can we describe what we do in a positive way? What will be the positive side of non-violence? Will be compassion, kindness, care, and so on. And the ideal principle is not only to be compassionate, but to be as compassionate as I can. In a sustainable way, but also in a challenging way. How can I be a little bit more compassionate today? How can I be a little bit more loving and kind today? That's the actual regulative principle. If you play out the implications of from no meat eating to be as kind of compassionate as you can, there's a huge gap there to bridge. And of course, that makes the principle, in one sense, way more broader, deeper, and demanding. And if you play out the implications of each one of those 4 principles in that way, we may be humbled to the point of acknowledging, well, I'm still breaking the 4 regulative principles on a daily basis. Because many times I fail in being as compassionate as I know I could. Many times I fail in being truthful as I should. And so on and so forth. And not to get neurotic, just to be honest and realistic, and not to get this toxic sense of certainty that I'm already following all the principles. No, I'm already doing it, so nobody can tell me anything. I'm legal. Superiority complex, who knows what. And then over-stigmatizing if someone fails to follow the principles in one of its symptoms, like, I don't know, again, smoking a cigarette. Oh, you broke one of the regulative principles. And we over-stigmatize that person as an out case or whatever, while we are probably breaking that same principle in maybe more subtle ways, even if we are not putting a cigarette to our mouth. You follow my point? So I think it's important to flesh out all the things so we remain more realistic about what this means, and more humble in trying to pursue them and understand these principles are way deeper than what we think. So again, what's meat eating was your original question. Why we do not eat meat? And the answer is, going back to ahimsa, going back to compassion, going back to the actual principle. That sheds light of why we are not doing that particular thing. In this case, no meat eating. No, our non-meat eating comes from a place of compassion, ideally, and that's again the challenge. We were talking about that, I think, yesterday. Because I can say, okay, I'm vegetarian or vegan out of compassion, but how I have to remain. Someone asked me yesterday the question, okay, Maharaj, but Jiva Jivasya Jivanam. Bhagavatam says one living entity is food for another. So still, even as vegetarian, vegan, we're killing. No, and even if not, even in regards to eating, now the Bhagavatam mentions other actions that also imply killing. If you are sweeping the floor, if you are walking, if you are breathing, literally, we are a killing machine at every step. No, I don't want to make it sound like wild, but in order to be alive, somebody else has to die. Basically, that's kind of the code. So the real question is, how do I justify my aliveness? Because somebody else is dying for me to remain alive. So am I living my life in a way that justifies the death of those that I'm killing for me to survive? Whether it's an animal, whether it's a plant, whether it is an insect, whether it is whatever, right? So for me, that's a real question. And again, not to create an extra pressure thing, but just to develop proper human responsibility. Like, okay, I know that to sustain my body, this body is a very important vehicle to engage in service, subtle body, psychic body, material, physical body, but I need to maintain it, and in order to maintain it, someone else is dying on the way of that on a daily basis, whether I'm aware of that or not. So for me, the real thing here is how much can I be aware of that? How much can I be humbled by that? How much I can pray for that entity, be grateful for that, and then take full responsibility in how I live my life that is being sustained by the death of other entities. Yesterday, we were mentioning how even in some native traditions in America, South America, all of the continent, and other places as well, they will do some ritual killing of animals. They may not be vegetarian, but they will kill the animal with lots more awareness and gratitude and humility than how sometimes we may be casually offering our vegetables to Krishna. You follow my point? I'm not saying with this, so it's the same and start killing animals and offer them with proper awareness. I'm just saying someone may be killing an animal, but doing it from a very conscious place. It's not our cup of tea, but in their particular tradition, framework, orientation, they are doing it with gratitude, ritualistically, if you want to call it, in a sacred way, with some awareness. And we find in the Vedas prescription for that as well. So let's be honest, it's not just Indian native traditions outside of the Vedic culture. There are prescriptions for that also in the Vedas. So my point here is they're doing it in a sacred way. And sometimes we may be offering to Krishna, but not in a sacred way. No, you follow my point? We might just take for granted. I'm vegetarian and I just have to follow the ritual and recite this mantra. Okay, now this is prasad. That's it. And in the whole process of that, there was not the same type of awareness, of gratitude, of responsibility and commitment with those I've killed, whether they are plants or animals or whatever, for me to survive. So I think that will be for me the most important consideration for us in terms of no-meat eating. No, compassion, awareness, gratitude to the other entities, and you ultimately, how do I conduct myself in my life? How do I justify my existence, knowing that for that to happen, someone else has to die on a daily basis? No, so again, not to create neurosis or pressure, but just to take proper responsibility, a realistic stance of how things work. And I'm related to everyone and everything, as we always say, Krishna in the center. So I don't know if that helps even, Prabhu.
Yeah, it does, Maharaj. Yeah, from what I got there, you're saying it's the intention that we do anything. Yeah, so our intention behind everything that we do, we should be more conscious of what we do. And yeah, I really like the part about ahimsa being a deeper part of no meat eating. So yeah, it was really Maharaj.
And again, going back to the first point, when we talk of ahimsa or compassion, non-violence, let's remember that it's not limited to what's on the plate, right? And that's one small chapter of my day in which I have to be loving and kind. But what about when I wake up from my table and I deal with other people and relate with myself. Again, I can be so violent to myself. I can mistreat myself so deeply. You are breaking the regulative principle of ahimsa in that moment. If I have self-hatred, again, because sometimes we forget that all these things have to be applied to us as well, right? Sometimes we hear compassion, love, and kindness, and it's just, okay, to our other species that we are eating, toward the Vaishnavas, toward the people I relate to, but also to myself. Also to Krishna. Because if Krishna loves me, if I hate myself, that's violent to Krishna even. Because Krishna is suffering by seeing me hating myself. If you want to play out in that way, right? Again, not to create neurosis in any, but just to understand we are all people, that we are real people. So if you love me and I hate myself, you will suffer by knowing that I hate myself. So somehow my hating myself is making you suffer. It's not that I want to make you suffer, but it's making you suffer. So Krishna is also a person, the supreme person. He's aware of all this stuff. So again, all these qualities have to be ideally, and it's a process, and we fail miserably in that, but it's a process, a gradual process that gradually will get closer and closer to our ideal state, so to say. It's a process in which whenever I express compassion, that has to be expressed in all possible directions. It's not that I'm compassionate to others and I hate myself. It's not that I'm compassionate to the animals and I hate humans, right? So the same. I love you, Krishna, but I don't like human race at all. I love you, this, and ideally these qualities have to be expressed in a non-contradictory way, like in one direction and in the other direction in a way that is not canceling the other direction, right? And it's not easy. I'm not saying easy. But if we do not understand that as such, we are basically, I will say, cheating ourselves. It becomes a form of spiritual bypassing. I concentrate my love or my compassion or my nonviolence to one specific concentrated point, so I don't have to be compassionate and loving in any other direction. And I cheat myself like, no, I'm very paka, very pure and correct in my eating. I'm purely vegetarian. And yes, but you are miserably mistreating everyone else in every other direction. So you follow my point? So we have to be careful not to use all these values and beautiful qualities as spiritual bypassing. So it has to be spread in a healthy way, in a wholesome way, spread in all possible directions. It's a gradual process. We are not there yet, probably, but that's the nature. That's our potential, basically. We have the potential of being loving and compassionate in every direction. So we have a commitment to our potential, as I like to say. So as long as it may take, but it's good not to cheat ourselves, basically, in that regard. Yeah.
Yeah, I like spiritual bypassing. I think that's a good answer for that, Maharaj.
You like spiritual bypassing?
No, I like the answer, spiritual bypass.
Oh, okay. Ooh, I was getting concerned.
Yeah, we tend to take things for granted, but we don't really look at the actual things that we're actually doing. So it's good to we can just bypass that and just say so we don't know why we're doing it.
Yeah. And there are so many, again, not to bring any neurosis, we have to be self-compassionate by acknowledging our own bypassing, but there's so many layers of that. It's like peeling and peeling. Anartha-nibriti, it becomes more and more subtle. And as we always quote the Srimad Bhagavatam, second verse, Dharma Prito Kaitavo Tra. Dharma Prito Kaitavo. This book is not about cheating in the name of religion, which is another way of saying spiritual bypassing. So right at its very onset, the Bhagavatam is declaring all this treatise has nothing to do with spiritual bypassing. So we will try to help you dismantle all that stuff here. So better you are honest and sincere in going through these pages, because if not, you don't have the ID card to read the book, so to say. The eligibility to approach the Bhagavatam is set in the beginning. So it's directed for someone who is honest. Dharma preto kaitavo traparamon in matsaranam satam. Satam means someone thoroughly honest. Srila Prabhupada will translate satam. So you have to be honest. You don't have to approach the button with a spiritual bypassy tendency, as much as you can be aware of that. And Bhagavatam is the book around which our tradition revolves. So Gaudiya Vaishnavism is not about spiritual bypassing, let's put it that way. Yeah. Thank you. Thank you, June. Let's go to our next raised hand coming from somewhere in the outer space. I think it's Jugal Kishore appearing. Yes, he's emerging. Where are you? Patala Loka, emerging into planet Earth, some interstellar. You are following the footsteps of Narad Muni, traveling all around the universe now. You have our Narad Muni in Tadatmya Sangha, Jugal Kishore.
Haribol.
Hopefully you are not as mischievous as Narad Muni, who appears at any moment and starts to churn the whole thing and then leaves.
Well,
but it has its purpose. You are. I would say you are kind of a trickster. You are kind of a trickster, so that's good. We always need the trickster archetype, so thank you for that.
Well, here will be a tricky question, maybe.
Of course.
Excuse me. It's about svarupa, and
can you define the term before, or maybe the question is about the definition of the term, just for us to know?
That's definitely it. Yes. What is swarup? What does it mean? And is there a theological equivalent in any other mystical school? And let me give you some little cookie crumbs of around the thought that I have. So actually, let me just add a third question instead, and then I'll let you free to go. So again, what is svarupa? Is there a theological equivalent in other mystical traditions? And is there a primary textual reference in Gaudiya Vaishnavism for our conception of svarup? All I know is that sometimes it's used as if it means your, quote unquote, original relationship with Krishna, or it means your highest perspective relationship with Krishna. But what is meant by original and what is meant by highest gets a little bit confusing. So somehow I feel like it bears on the ideas of inherent or inherited bhakti as well.
Well, thank you for the question. So swarup, the word swarup, the Sanskrit term swarup, as with any Sanskrit term, just to put the whole thing in context, never has one single meaning, right? So Sanskrit is always, context sensitive. So you cannot define a word isolated from the context in which that word comes. So if you ask me what does Atma mean? My answer will be, I don't know, because I don't know in which context the word Atma is coming. Now, it can mean Atma can mean soul, as we roughly translated in English. It can mean, it's a name for Krishna. It can mean the body. It can mean the mind. It can mean all of that. So depending on the context, the word has a particular meaning, which I find it genius-like, a whole language which, tells you pay attention to the context, right? You cannot define something separate from a context. In other words, everything exists in some context. Don't try to isolate reality from its context, from its relationship, from its relationality with whatever came before, whatever came after. So in itself, the very structure of the Sanskrit language is trying to give us that lesson. Reality exists in a context, in a relational context. So the moment you try to amputate a word and just analyze it or define it separately, at that very moment, the word becomes meaningless. You cannot speak about it anymore. You cannot say anything. You cannot define it, because every word exists in connection to other words, as we exist in connection to other entities and to Krishna in the center. So in itself, that's a very important point. Even before we learn the Devanagari and the language in itself, no? Just how the Sanskrit works. So it's contextual sensitive, context sensitive. So Swarup is not an exception to this rule. That's my point. But of course, I imagine from which, regarding listening to your question, how we in our Gaudiya Vaishnava tradition, we mostly use the term. And of course, as you quoted, I wrote a whole book. My first book is a lot about this word, if you will, in the book Inherent or Inherited, and invoke the word Swarup so many times. So Swarup can be translated again as nature, whatever that means according to the context again. So sometimes Swarup can refer to your acquired nature on a more psycho-emotional level, if you will, in a more karmic level. You have a certain mind, you have a certain psychology, you have a certain intellect, personality in this lifetime due to your previous actions. So that can be phrased as Swarup in the scripture, as your nature. That's not speaking about the nature of the soul, right? Again, as Atma can refer to the soul, but also to the mind, to the body, you can apply Swarup in all these different layers as well. No? You have your physical nature. No? You have a certain body. No? In Ayurveda, they may use the word Prakriti. No? Are you Vata? Are you Kapha? Are you Pitta? So that's why I'm trying. I'll go specifically to the usage that we generally do, but I'm just first making it clear that Swarup can go and Swarup also coming Swarupa. Now Rupa means form, and Swa means one's own. So Swarup, one's own form. Again, you can start talking about your physical form, right? Your own intellectual form, so to say. Ultimately, of course, it applies to the Atman. So sometimes when we hear the word Swarup and we say nature, we can, of course, ultimately apply to the nature of the soul. And that's a big area of conversation. What does it mean? And in connection to our particular tradition, the first verse that comes to mind is a famous line, 2 lines from the Srimad Bhagavatam, which describe mukti. I addressed this in my first book as well. So the 2 lines say, Muktir hitwanyata rupam swarupena vyabhyastitihi. So there the word Swarup appears. And many other verses the word Swarup is there. But I'm just quoting one which is a very well-known one, which gives a very interesting idea. Because says,
do you have the reference for that? I'm sorry, do you have the canto or a verse?
Yeah, I can tell you in a minute. I don't remember by heart the number of the verse.
Okay.
1 second. I mean, it's in my first book, but I don't want to talk. 2:10:6. There you have it.
Thank you.
So Srimad Bhagavatam, 2nd Canto, 10th chapter, 6th verse. Muktir hidvanyata rupam swarupena vyabhyastitihi. One of the 10 main topics of the Srimad Bhagavatam, the 9th topic is mukti, or liberation. So these lines say, what's liberation? Muktir hitvanyata rupam swarupena vyabhyastitihi. I will be brief because there's so much to say here. So basically it means mukti means to be free from all false designations, from all upadhis, from all false sense of self. Swarupena vyabhyastitihi. So vyabhyastitihi means to be situated in your own swarup. So again, what does swarup mean? In your own nature. Now, that's here comes the conversation, and I know for some of you may have a different opinion than mine, and that's fine. For some means, okay, to be situated in your own nature means to discover your inherent spiritual body in connection to Krishna. And as you know, my stance, which I think is the stance of Shastra, is you don't have an inherent spiritual body. You have the potential to attain that by embracing Bhakti, by you choosing how to embrace Bhakti in a certain way that gives rise to that particular identity. And how this verse is proving that? Well, it speaks about mukti, right? And one of the 5 muktis in our tradition, although it's not our cup of tea. There are 5 muktis: Salokya, Samipya, Sarupya, Sarshti, Sayujya. No? Sayujya means you emerge in Brahman. In Brahman, there is no spiritual body. There's no spiritual identity. There's no sense of individuality. But that's mukti. And this verse means mukti means to be situated in your svarup. So svarup doesn't necessarily mean you have a spiritual body. Svarup means you are situated in the Atma, in what the soul is. So you can have the soul with bhakti or the soul without bhakti. It's not that there's, again, that's a long conversation, and that's why I consider writing a whole book about it. But there's no inherent bhakti in the soul, according to Shastra, according to my reading of Shastra. And we can go through many verses in a scripture which say that, basically. I don't know, just a few ones that come to mind, and I don't want to make this a whole conversation, but Chaitanya Charitamrita says what? Brahmanda Brahmiti Kona Bhagyavan Jiva Guru Krishna Prasade Pai Bhakti Lata Beach. Just to go to some of the main ones. And there says there, by the grace of Guru and Krishna, one receives the seed of the vine of Krishna Bhakti. Pai means you are receiving the seed. So if you already have the whole thing inside of you, what's the need to receive a seed? Right? Chaitanya Charitamrita says also, Krishna Bhakti Janmamul Hoy Sadhusanga. The root cause that gives birth to bhakti is sadhusanga. And many other quotes. I don't want to torture you with that now. So my point with this is Swarup can mean just who am I, situated in who I am as an Atma, as a soul, not necessarily embracing bhakti, or embracing bhakti on a certain minimum degree. In the Yoga Sutras of Patanjali also, they will have a talk about Swarup of the Atma, and they're not talking about spiritual bodies in the Leela to serve Krishna lovingly. They're just talking about realizing who you are as an Atma. And part of that can be, an extension of that can be identifying yourself with Brahman. And an extension of that in our tradition will be embracing bhakti and serving Bhagavan. And that will take to a particular identity in the Leela, which also that identity sometimes is referred to as Swarup. But our Swarup doesn't, again, necessarily mean that I have a complete Gopa body buried here inside of me or something like that. Swarup can just be, what's the Atma? And the Atma is Tatastha Shakti. And Tatastha Shakti, it can be defined as a unit of potential. So, and in that sense, we cannot be separated from what we can become. So, but the potential can go in different directions also, right? I don't know if that makes any sense, if that helps, if I need to address
It
something.
does. I guess I think the first part of the answer is simply that you can't really isolate Sanskrit terms and define them is at least half of the answer. Because of course, looking for textual references, I'm like, okay, where is it first addressed? You know, who has the master theory, or like, you know, the grandiose words on what Swarup really is. So, okay, so there's some places in the Srimad Bhagavatam you say that you could go to. Would you say that 2.10.6 is one of the premier places to go to in terms of studying, understanding Swarup from a bhakti perspective, not from these other kinds of mukti, or not from, you know, the Yoga Sutra perspective?
Depending which commentary you go, they will read the word Swarup in that verse of the Bhagavatam from a more bhakti perspective than others. But yeah, I will say, I can recommend to you then, remind me privately, and I can share with you some commentaries to that verse, which different commentaries will shed different light of this, on this word Swarup. Some more devotional, some more neutral, so to say. And there's place for both, because you can say, okay, the Swarup of the soul is this, and you don't need to go to bhakti. But also, if you see the soul as all that of what the soul can become as a unit of potential, then you end up in bhakti. So some commentators will give a more neutral commentary on Swarup, and some others will give a more bhakti biased so to say,
Yeah.
commentary on the term. And both are
Let me-
complementary, necessary.
Let me add one more thing, and then we can move on. Part of my thinking about this had to do with the idea that as a final fixed point, that once we unveil our svarupa, then that's it. That kind of defines our action through into eternity. I will always be a blade of grass, or I will whatever. Versus a dynamic understanding. Yes, go ahead, Swami.
Sorry.
Well, yes, that static sort of fixed nature versus a dynamic understanding of play within the Leela. Swarup, it seems like Swarup is not then fixed. It's not just you reveal it once and for all, game over, but it's something that continues to unfold in some way.
Yeah, it's fixed and it's not fixed at the same time. Achintya bheda bhed.
Okay.
It's fixed in one sense. If I sthai bhav, that's the expression of Rupa Goswami. Sthai bhav. Sthai means fixed, and bhava means emotion. So at one point you have a certain emotion for Krishna. Sthai bhav means sakyarati, madhuryarati. You love Krishna as a friend, as a lover, whatever. That's fixed in the sense that you really want that for eternity, and you live your life in a way that you are projecting that. In that sense, it's fixed. But then what happens in the context of that fixed sense of relationship, that's constantly evolving and unfolding. So in that sense, there is no final ending point.
Yes.
You have your own svarupa. In that sense, you have your own spiritual identity, that they have, whatever word you want to use, but that's constantly transforming. It doesn't mean that you are shifting from Vatsalya Rasa to Sakya Rasa to Madhurya, not changing in that way. That's fixed. But in the context, in the perimeter of that fixity, you have space for constant newness and freshness and ever evolvingness. That's what the scripture describes. That's, again, I don't want to sound like I'm promoting my books here, but the third book I'm writing is basically all about that. The dynamic experience that takes place in the context of a particular relationships with God. No, so there will, if your concern is that you will get bored in Golok Vrindavan, that won't happen. Just in case, relax. You will have lots of fun there.
Okay. I mean, we have to start from our own experience, right? Instead of imagining our way into the Leela.
So imagine your experience with someone with whom the relation is fixed. You have a relationship with your mom, you have a relationship with your kids, you have a relationship with your wife. It's fixed. No, it's not that your wife becomes your son, your mom becomes your father. It's fixed. The rasa is fixed, so to say. But in the context of that relationship, if both of you do your homework, there is place for ever evolving development and depth and breadth and experience. There's no limit, literally. So as you are trying to bring us here to, some point of reference that may be more familiar for us, try to think, hopefully we all can think of some example of that. We all can think of a fixed relationship in which, despite its fixity, in some terms, we experience a constant growth and we keep rediscovering each other in the relationship, whether we are friends, whether we are partners, whether we are whatever. That's the ideal form of any relationship. No, I mean, as we were talking the other day, the only way you can sustain a relationship is by developing it. If the relationship just remains stuck in one point, there's no more maintenance of the relationship. The relationship starts to decay at the point that it becomes stuck in one point. That's the beginning of the end of the relationship, any relationship. So to sustain something, we have to be engaged on a daily basis to develop that. And if we do that, we will realize there's no limit to this. And as I like to say, we are Vaishnavas, and Vishnu is the god of maintenance, the god of sustainability. So that's our main duty, not so much to create, not so much to destroy, but sometimes we have to do both, but to maintain. And again, maintenance is development, not just maintaining something always in the same place. That's impossible. And sometimes devotees or people try to do that. Let's keep things as they are, or as they were 30 years ago, and the whole structure is collapsing, and you're putting some sticking tape here so it looks the same. It doesn't need to change. It needs to change. Change is the norm. No? That's how things are maintained, through change, through development. So yeah, Veda. I think we all need to be comfortable with this paradoxical thinking that, okay, there is something that remains fixed, there is something that is not fixed, both of them coexisting at the same time. That's a type of paradoxical thinking, and that's pervading not only all of our philosophy, Veda, but this template of Achintya Veda Tattva can be applied, as many sadhus have presented, suggested, to the whole of reality. That's how reality operates. The paradoxical coexistence of oneness and difference, unity and diversity, fixity and ever-evolvingness, changelessness and dynamism. Both are present simultaneously, everywhere. So it's not either or, no? Black and white in this case, no? But it's always nuance, right? So we have to develop that type of thinking so we can coexist with reality. We can be at peace, basically, with reality, because reality is so nuanced in every aspect. So if we are a black and white person, it won't work for, we need to be like that in a certain chapter of our initial life, but then we need to evolve into the multiplicity of gray in between black and white, right? So yeah, thank you.
That helps for now. Thank you so much. I will listen to that again.
Okay.
And go. Yes.
Okay. Send my greetings to Narad Muni in the outer space over there. And tell him we need him over here in New Zealand as well, whenever he wants to come. Okay, we continue with Karuneshwari and Rabindra from England. I mean, from Ireland, but from England. It's paradoxical now, because you're born in Ireland, but you're living in England. All you UK people put me in such trouble when I have to say from where you're talking to.
I'm pseudo-English. I'm going to ask a different question than I was planning to ask, just because this other one follows on better from what Yugal Kishore has just asked, and it's another question I've had for a while anyway. I can ask the other one next time.
Yeah.
So on this topic of, the origin of the Jiva, so it never sat right with me that we fell from the spiritual world. It just didn't make sense. It was, why would you leave a place where everything's so blissful and you have your loving relationship with Krishna? That never made sense. So then this other explanation that we've never fallen from the spiritual world made a lot more logical sense. But at the same time, I've struggled, actually a little bit less so now, but I have struggled in the past because it seemed like a depressing situation just to have been eternally in the material world if we didn't fall from the spiritual world. So the only way I've found it a little bit less depressing recently is thinking, well, it must have still been like an element of choice, not that we were just put here, randomly, but that it's still our own choice in some way, which makes it seem, less unfair, I guess. I think a lot of devotees find it a very unfair explanation that we're just somehow here eternally conditioned. So wondering if you could say something about that.
Yeah, thank you. So yeah, this topic is somehow a related topic, not necessarily the same topic, no, Bhakti inherent or not inherent, and the origin of the Jiva, which of course in itself the question is, the framing of the topic is like an oxymoron, because there's no origin of the Jiva. It's not like there's a beginning point, but even in how we present or think of the topic, we tend to go there because that's how we generally think of things, not like a beginning and an end. But the soul has no beginning or end, so it goes way beyond our our system, so to say, how we used to see things with beginning and end. So there is no beginning to the soul, there's no end to the soul, there's no beginning to material nature, there's no end to it, and therefore there's no beginning to the relationship between the soul and material nature. That's the logic that is presented by both Baladev Vidyabhushan, Vishwanath Chakravarti Thakur when they're commenting on the verse on the Bhagavad Gita, 13th chapter, verse 20, just to give some reference, where the word anadi comes. Anadi means without beginning. So this is not someone making up this whole idea. That word anadi is all over Shastra. It's in Vedanta Sutra, very clear when the topic is addressed. It's in the Bhagavad Gita, in the verse I just mentioned. It's in the Bhagavatam in many sections. And anadi means without beginning. So basically the idea is the soul is without beginning, material nature is without beginning. So the relation between the two of them, the glue that ties them, so to say, called karma, is also without beginning. That said, and I know, again, just to speak about something without beginning, whether it is this or anything, it goes beyond our capacity to think. So I personally do not talk too much about this topic either. Of course, if someone asks me, I say something, but I don't feel it's the main thing to emphasize, and we have to be talking all day how we are here from time without beginning, because I don't think that's the most important thing. But also I think it's important to clarify things that, for example, we don't fall from Golok Vrindavan. No, that makes, with all respect, no much sense. No, how can you fall from there? What can make you fall from there? No, while the scripture at the same time clearly say there is no Maya in the spiritual world, there are no gunas in the spiritual world, there is no influence of illusion there. So how can you fall from there? Right? And so many other things. But anyhow, regarding your question, and I heard the word, it's unfair, as you say, for some devotees, it's unfair that we are here. But the point is that nobody has decided that. It's not that Krishna had a master plan and say, okay, I will send all of you, because there's no beginning point. Again, there's no point that Krishna created everything from zero. No, there's no creatio ex nihilo, to go to a Latin term, as in some Christian groups they entertained the idea. At one point there was God only, there was nothing, and then things started to exist. Of course, we will talk in terms of beginning cycles of creation, sustenance, destruction, creation, sustenance, but the cycles in themselves do not have a beginning, right? So we are eternal. So we happen to exist, the world happens to exist. And as you say, and that's the main point I try to make, and Karuneshwari, we choose to be in that cycle. So not to put blame, not to go neurotic, just to take responsibility. I think we have that experience in this lifetime, even if it's too overwhelming to think about lifetimes without beginning, even if probably it's even too much for us to be aware of a second lifetime of ours apart from this one, right? Sometimes this only lifetime is too much. So don't think, I don't want even to know what happened in the previous lifetime. What to speak about endless cycles without beginning. So let's just concentrate on what we have, as Yugal Kishore said. Let's go to something concrete. It's very clear for us that we have choices. We make choices. And according to our choices, we have free will. How free is our will? Okay, that's another point of conversation, but we have agency. No? Kartritva. Jiva Goswami uses that term. No? So we are agents of experience. We are not just like automatons, robots. There is will. So that, and if whatever there is will, there is responsibility for that will. Proportionate to the will we have, especially in the human form of life, consciousness is, how to say, going a little bit more beyond the surface than in other species. There is a corresponding sense of responsibility. So in this lifetime, we can see, I can make certain choices, and there's a result to those choices. I can make other choices, and that will create a different result in my consciousness, if I see reality. So then just multiply that for all the other lifetimes, basically. And it's the same principle. So it's not a principle of unfairness. It's not a principle of chastisement. It's not a principle of sheer randomness. It's just a principle of responsibility. And as I like to say, the goal of life is love, divine love, and love represents the ultimate responsibility. So if you don't get the responsibility lesson in its more basic way first, we won't be able to grasp what's love and how much responsibility is in love. So the main teaching in this connection for me is, learn to be responsible for your choices. And I know that for many of us, we don't like the word responsibility. Many times the word responsibility is a trigger. because we may also attach that to some interpretations or ideas that are not so healthy. But as I like to make display of words, responsibility means response ability, right? To be response able. No, that means to be responsible. You have to have an ability to respond to life, to whatever comes, and make properly informed choices, or every time better informed choices. No, till you eventually make the most refined possible choice, which is divine love, with full integrity, without contradiction. We are work in progress, but I will try to concentrate the answer there and concentrate myself in that, because of course if we go too much in our head to times lifetime without beginning and this and that, you can be lost forever there also. So there is a danger to that. And I know that it's, as I remember talking with the devotee, and he will say, of course, the idea of falling from the spiritual world, some may say falling from Brahman, somehow satisfies some part of our intellect, at least for some people, in terms of, there was a beginning point. There's a story to explain this whole thing, right? But of course, again, each story may have its pros and cons. And I know that when I say, there's no beginning, anadi karma, in one sense, we are solving some of the problems from the other theories, so to say. But still, it may be problematic for some to just think about something without beginning, and some other problems come, and we can try to talk about it. But there's a point that we also need to put the discussion to rest, because our head only can get there to a certain point. And then we have to, I will say, embrace our practice with the experiences and the certainties that confirm that this is real. And through practice and through inner realization, we will be able to understand what we cannot understand otherwise, so to say. And that's why Bhaktivinoda Thakur will say, once someone asked him about these things, and he said, that will be solved in meditation. That was his wise answer also. He said some other things in his books about this, but at the end of the day, that will be finally solved, harmonized, reconciled in meditation. In other words, go and enter into trance, go into samadhi, and there everything becomes clear. Go beyond your mind, basically that means samadhi. By Krishna's grace, go deep into your practice, and eventually you will have a direct experience of how reality operates, which is beyond words, which is beyond mind. So unless you go and touch that realm, we can try to say something, articulate and think and make sense of so many things, and that's what we are trying to do. And we should do on some level. I mean, I'm not saying let's be intellectually lazy and just become extremely sentimental and aribol and everything is achintya and inconceivable, and we press the chintya button over and over again. That's the only button in our keyboard. No. But also we have to learn when to stop speaking and asking and knowing, when to go into meditation, where some things still are a mystery for us, when to say, I don't know, when to coexist with uncertainty. So both things need to be there, especially in topics like this one. So I don't know if that makes any sense, Karuneshwari.
Yeah, that's good. I think just accepting that it's not something unfair is really important in relationship with Krishna.
Yeah.
In trying to accept Krishna and accept that he loves us unconditionally, that doesn't sit properly with the idea of something unfair. So that's why I'm feeling it had to be something that was our element of choice ultimately.
Yeah, because one could frame the whole thing, it's unfair because without beginning, I'm conditioned and I didn't have a choice. But you can say, well, from time without beginning, you always have the chance to love Krishna and you didn't take it. It's the same thing framed from another perspective. Again, not to put blame on someone, but just see it from a place of responsibility. Because Krishna loves you, he gives you free will. Because love implies a voluntary decision and invitation to love. So if he wouldn't have given us a choice in the first place, how much loving that was, we can make that argument. No? So it's better to, I will say, because he loves us, he's giving us free will, but free will entails the risk of choosing something else apart from Krishna, which we have been expertly doing for quite a long time. And he still loves us. So that's important to keep in place. And he still keeps extending us that invitation in the best possible way, as we always give the example of the GPS, right? We choose to turn in the wrong direction and the GPS says recalculating, right? I'm trying to provide the best possible scenario for us to choose to make a more informed decision. And then we choose the wrong direction, another lifetime, Krishna recalculating. So that's his merciful presence and accompanying in our journey. So I think that's a more realistic and healthy way to understand all this without the need to, to change the philosophy to somehow accommodate our needs, so to say, right? Okay.
Thank you. Perfect.
Thank you. Okay, next question we have Alexander. Thank you so much. From Norway, Alexander?
Sweden.
Getting close. Okay, welcome.
Yes, thank you. So I have 2 questions, but we'll see how much unpacking needs to be done. I don't want to be sneaky or take anyone else's time. So, so a little bit of backstory for this first question. I have been learning a lot of NLP and hypnosis and coaching because that just seems to be the trajectory my life has taken, to be able to help people with different emotional problems, habits, things of that nature. And one of my main mentors that I've been learning from, he's into spirituality also. So he kind of bakes it into some of his techniques and his way of teaching and concepts and stuff. But his understanding is what devotees would, call a mayavadi. So you can see my kind of like inner conflict here, because he's a great teacher. I love using stuff that I've learned from him and learning more from him. And at the same time, I grew up kind of like with Krishna conscious philosophy in the background. My parents are devotees from ISKCON, and so constantly heard this thing where mayavadi, bad, bad, bad. And so I'm just curious, like, to what extent I'm like trying to harmonize where I can keep learning from him and also, like remain a Gaudiya Vaishnava, if you get what I'm trying to say, I guess.
Yeah. Okay. Thank you for your question. A few things to clarify here. First of all, I will say that when our acharyas have spoken strongly about this word, mayavadis is a whole word, right? In the Gaudiya Vaishnava lingo, it's loaded with intensity. Now, whomever receives that accolade, that labeling, is basically branded for eternity. And it's really negative, right? It's really seen in a negative way. And I can understand why, but I like to clarify a few things in this connection first. So one is, as I mentioned before, we were talking about Swarup, that Jugal Kishore asked, and I quoted this verse from the Bhagavatam that talks about mukti, and I mentioned that there are 5 types of mukti, and one of them is Brahma Sayujya, or the Bhagavatam will call it Ekatvam, which means emerging into Brahman, which we may call impersonal liberation. That's a type of mukti mentioned in the Bhagavatam, therefore validated in the Bhagavatam. And mukti means liberation. And I think we talked the other day, I don't know if it was in our satsang or in some other meeting, sorry, I got a little bit mixed sometimes, but we were talking how nobody falls. I think it was here, one question Sweta Devradika made, if I'm not mistaken, or maybe someone else, that I quoted the verse from the Bhagavatam that seems to say that you fall from mukti, but actually bimukta manina, says the verse. You consider yourself to be liberated, but you are not still liberated. So if someone attains Brahman, impersonal liberation, there's no fall from there. That's another misunderstanding that sometimes is there in the community of devotees. And I remember quoting something. I know that was a reply to Rasangi, I think. Anyhow, I was quoting Prabhupada, and Prabhupada was sharing in one of his books how that's a type of liberation, and you don't come back to the material world from there. Why? Because it's mukti. Again, if it's mukti, means it's mukti. Mukti means liberation. If you fall from liberation, you cannot call that liberation. It's just a basic term, right? If you fall from liberation, you have to name that with another word, not liberation, because muktir hitvanyatarupam svarupena vyabhyastiti. Mukti, you are beyond all illusion, all false designation, and you are situated in your sarup, in an eternal identity as a soul. So just to destigmatize a little bit, I will say now there are two types of impersonalists, and I've been recently meeting with a friend who is quite familiar with the Ramakrishna mission, and he was telling me that in their tradition, many of them are pursuing Brahma Sayuja, but they also acknowledge, at least some of them, I don't know every one of them, but some of them acknowledge you can go to Golok Vrindavan and serve Krishna in the Leela eternally. So it's fun. It's not that they're saying only Brahman is the real thing. That's what our acharyas condemned strongly and called mayavadi. Brahma Saptyan Jagan Mitya. Everything, mayavadi comes from those who say everything is maya. No, that's mayavad. No. Those who say everything is maya except for Brahman. And that goes all along to the point of everything is maya, including the form of Bhagavan, including your identity as a soul, including the relationship between God and you in love. All that is illusion. The only real thing is Brahman. So that's the main idea that our acharyas oppose, that radical non-dualism. We are also non-dual, but not radical in that sense. We are radical personalists, as I like to say. But this proposal is hyper-reductionistic when they say only Brahman is real. So if you are a Krishna Bhakta, that's illusion, basically. At one point, you have to realize that between you and Krishna, there's no absolute difference at all. And you don't even become Brahman. You realize you are Brahman. They will say that. So I can understand why scriptures and our acharyas have used strong words for that, because it's a very reductionistic term. It's like if we would say, only Krishna is real, and whomever is worshipping any form of God is an illusion. You will say that's fanatical, right? Well, if I say only Brahman is real and all your other religious conceptions are Maya, that's equally fanatical. That's equally reductionistic, right? So in one sense, we could say our acharyas were strongly opposing the fanaticism, to being over reductionistic and thinking only my take on the absolute is the real thing. Everything else is illusion. No. That's pretty fundamentalist in one sense. So I would say that's the criticism, that's the mayavad pointing to. But if someone has an affinity for the undifferentiated face of the absolute, but at the same time is not saying that everyone else is wrong who pursues other paths, there's no problem in one sense. It's not our cup of tea, probably, as Gaudiya Vaishnavas, but it's an aspect of the absolute that is presented in the scripture. Scripture is prescribing a sadhana to attain that. You can attain that and remain there forever in eternity. So it cannot be that bad. Again, it's not our cup of tea. But if you have a place there for eternity, how can that be bad? Right? If Brahma Sayuja is horrible, so that means there is some horrible corner in the spiritual world? No. So it's important just to frame that way. I remember yesterday, I'm just in the context of the conversation, yesterday I shared one Facebook memory from a verse of the Bhagavatam that I shared. I will share it briefly with mostly the commentary of Vishwanath Chakrabarti Thakur. It's 6th canto, 4th chapter, verse 32. So it says, that same supreme Brahman, free from contradiction, is perceived through Bhakti and Jnana as possessing opposite attributes, because the followers of each of these paths, Bhakti and Jnana, are established in a particular faith, but directed to the same object. So it's a very reconciling verse. Brahma and Bhagavan is the same object. Brahmeti, Paramadmeti, Bhagavaniti, Shabdyate, Devatan say. Advaya Gyantata realities, one non-dual consciousness, which expresses itself as Brahman, Paramatma, and Bhagavan, but it's the same thing. So Vishwanath Chakravarti Thakur comments, both Bhakti and Gyan perceive, Bhaktas and Gyanis perceive the same Brahman without disagreement. When studying these two different scriptures, those related to Bhakti and to Gyan, there's no disagreement. There seem to be only contrary ideas regarding what exists and what does not exist. Someone may ask how it is that there's neither contradiction nor disagreement, so the answer will be that the particular qualities of each realization arise from one's fixing one's faith on the same real object from different perspectives. The form with qualities promoted in the scriptures relating to Bhakti is a real form, not a false object. The form without qualities promoted in the scriptures related to Gyan is also a real form. Thus, the scriptures related to both Bhakti and Gyan do not contradict each other. Those who argue regarding differences present in the scriptures without knowing their true conclusion are condemned themselves. So that's Vishwanath Chakravarti Thakur's purport to the verse, which basically is very reconciling. No? There's no contradiction. There are different phases of the absolute, with form, without form, personal, impersonal, differentiated, undifferentiated, Veda, Ved. And there are different scriptures prescribing them. There are different types of faith. For pursuing each path, you receive certain samskars. But it's not that we should, again, think they are bad people, they are wrong, as they should not think the same thing about other people. That's the actual problem, right? When whether from one side or the other, you start to enter into this, okay, you are wrong, I'm right, this is the highest, you are lowest. But if we are talking about correct ideas about the absolute, which all have their place in eternity, we have to acknowledge that. Again, whether it's my cup of tea or not, that's not the main thing here. My cup of tea is my cup of tea. No? Again, no need to I wouldn't say there should be a conflict, especially regarding your particular situation, Alexander, that you say, okay, he is a mentor, coaching mentor for you. It's not necessarily your spiritual guru, so to say. So one can learn so much from everyone. And if at some point we feel a difference in our approach, okay, you are called to the impersonal aspect of the absolute, I'm called to the personal one. We can even have a conversation of that. I mean, I've had conversations with people who practice Advaita Vedanta. I've even invited them to my podcast, as scandalous as that may seem for some. And we can have a conversation because we are talking about the same non-dual substance, non-dual reality. We're not talking about two different things. And I personally feel we need to have lots of those conversations, because sometimes there has been an over stigmatization of mayavad to the point that you absolutely dismiss altogether all possibilities of any impersonal realization. And that's not doing justice to what the scriptures are telling, or to what our acharyas are saying, like I just quoted Vishwanath Chakravarti Thakur. It doesn't mean we are going in that direction, but it just means that everything has its place. And what doesn't have its place is the type of ultra-reductionism and fanaticism that can come both from a radical non-dualist, but also from a radical personalist, who is not so radical personalist and becomes a fanatical, say only Krishna is the real thing, Brahman does not exist, you are all doomed, or you, by Christian people or Vishnu Bhaktas, come here to the real thing. That's not how Mahaprabhu behaved. No? He engaged in conversation with people from all traditions. He visited Shiva temples, Kali temples in his tours in South India. He was not just like, I only enter here, I only speak with them. And as he converted so many, naturally, he shared with many without converting anyone, without the need of making them change their faith. So I think that's a more safe and mature position, and learning from everyone. Again, if we are properly situated, we can learn. Mahaprabhu is learning from the grass, learning from the tree. Everyone can teach us always some valuable lessons if we have that capacity, if we are rooted enough to deal with that. Again, in the beginning, sometimes we may need to be just focused in our tradition, because we may get confused with too much diversity. We first need to be properly rooted in our tradition, so we can then appreciate, integrate, and reconcile everyone. So there's space for a more fenced chapter, which may seem a little bit more fanatical, but eventually we have to outgrow that fence. And that's the example Prabhupada gave. In the beginning, the Guru will put a fence around the disciple because the very tender Bhakti sprout is very fragile and sensitive to other influences and may become easily uprooted. But when it grows naturally protected by the fence, it's growing upward and it's growing downward. So it's getting rooted and it's growing beyond the fence. So when the proper level of rootedness is there, that will correspond to the sprout having grown beyond the fence. And now you can deal with all the outward influences coming from outside the fence without being uprooted. So, yeah, there's place for that as well. I hope that helps, Alexander.
Definitely helps. Thank you, Maharaj. And
since I see Divyangana raising her hand, we may keep your second question for next meeting, and the same for Karuneshwari, that I know she had another question. So we will close today's meeting with Divyangana. You can unmute yourself from France. And thanks for joining us.
Sorry. Haribol.
Hare Krishna.
Thank you. Yes, I had a question because I think it, some may be repeating some pattern in his life again and again and again, and be conscious of this pattern happening and trying to put some conscience around it. But sometimes it just feels like being stuck in a video game. When you don't succeed your level, you have to go back to the beginning. And, and you're like, okay, do I have to go there again and again and again? And yeah, so yeah, that's a little bit my question. When we start being conscious about repeating certain pattern and falling back into certain situation, that what to do about it? I mean, or is it like this thing is already solving us? I don't know. Yes, it's my question.
Yeah. Thank you. Few things, and of course we don't have that much time. I would like to fold more, but a few things. One is, of course, generally questions like this, I'm sure, always have a more personal, whether it's your case or someone else's, that we know some more specific individual situation behind the general question. And of course, it's not maybe the moment to bring more detailed personal things into the public, but my point is, I can only reply to the question in a general way, no? Because I don't know the specifics of the particular case behind the question. That generally there is some situation that we are going through and we feel, as you say, okay, I'm falling into this pattern over and over again. Why? What to do? And by knowing what's the pattern, by knowing who is the person, by knowing the details, of course, the reply to the question can be also more specific. So, but that's again generally for more personal, private exchanges. So I will give just a general answer, but knowing that that may not be entirely satisfactory. That's my point, because what we may need ultimately something radically personal. But what I will say, what I can say is that, first of all, as we like to say always, it's not only happening. If it's happening, if the question comes because you feel it's happening to you, Divyangana, I will say it's not only happening to you, it's happening to all of us. So I think that's an important beginning, because many times we, as we always have been talking these days, we self-isolate ourselves in our problems, in our going back to the same pattern, and feel like, oh, again to me, why this happening to me? This happening to almost everyone. So that allows for putting your situation in the context of everyone. Again, going back to Sanskrit, and existing in context, we exist in relation. So whatever we are going through is what most people is going through. So that allows for more compassion to ourselves and compassion for everyone else who is going through those same things. I think that's an important way to begin dealing with the situation, whatever it may be, to universalize it, so to say. Not to think everyone else is going through this, but most. And because if not, we isolate ourselves in the experience, and that becomes the actual real problem. Maybe not so much the falling into the same pattern, but the fact that we are just separating ourselves from the rest of the world and seeing ourselves as the only ones going through this, and that starts to become the real problem. So that's one thing I will say. And the second thing I will say is that the fact that we may feel or see or realize, oh, I'm falling into the same pattern all over again, doesn't necessarily mean that there's something wrong. Again, I'm talking in general. In some cases, there may be something we need to pay attention, but in some cases, it means I'm just need to learn new lessons every time I fall into this pattern. It's not that I don't want to fall into this pattern anymore. I always want a new pattern every time I make a new step. No, maybe you need to go back. But it doesn't necessarily mean that you're just going in circles and not going anywhere. No? As I like to say, you may be going in circles, but not in this way, but in a spiral-like way. No? So the circles become more and more, ample, no? More expanded. Still, you are going in circles, but in a way that the circle becomes bigger and bigger. So you may be coming to the same place, but hopefully, and that's why I say hopefully, with new eyes. No? So we may need to revisit the same pattern or same situation from different perspectives, from different levels of depth. It's not that I'm done with it only once. I only need to go back to that pattern once. I learned all my lessons. Now bring me a new pattern now. Probably that's not the necessity. We need to revisit that pattern a few times, and doesn't need to be repetitive or exactly the same thing. We can have a new experience in the same quote unquote pattern. You follow my point? So I think it's good to be open to that. So we don't think, oh, again here, nothing new to learn here, and we start to lament, and that in itself creates the same pattern over and over again. So probably the paradoxical way to solve that is when the same pattern comes. Of course, you're already seeing the pattern, which in itself is a big step, because many times you don't even see that that's going on. So that is half of the problem solved, I will say. So there is a place for you to congratulate and celebrate that. Again, to see some light at the end of the tunnel, to invoke some positive appreciation. And then, again, when the pattern comes, learn the lesson, welcome the lesson, because if we just are in denial or negative, okay, again, the same pattern, nothing new, that will perpetrate a similar experience in the future, to feel I'm stuck, it's always the same. And we may need just to be open, curious, as we were talking these days here with the devotees, and discover something in that pattern, that lesson. And once we take that stance, probably the pattern will be exhausted, so to say, and we are ready for a pattern upgrade, if you want to use that terminology, right? But yeah, sometimes we need to learn a few lessons in the same situation. So it's never the same in one sense. It's like the water of the river. It seems the same, but it's never the same. So we are the same. Things seem to be the same, but strictly speaking, nothing is ever the same, because everything is moving and evolving. So if it seems the same, maybe that's the pattern we need to address. It's not so much the external situation or whatever, but it's my tendency to see things as always the same, which is never the case. So trying to be open, think, pray, and try to discover, okay, what's the newness in this pattern that seems to be the same? Because technically speaking, it's never the same. And that's why I'm giving the example of the expanded circles. It seems we are going in circles, but actually they are becoming broader and broader. So in that sense, it's never the same. So that's as much as I can say with the time I have and with the question presented in a general way, which of course I totally understand. So I hope each of you, because it's not only for Divyangana, each of us can draw from the general pattern and apply that in a more individual, specific, personal way to each one of our situation. So thank you, Divyangana, for the question. I hope that helps. Sri Chaitanya Mahaprabhu ki jai, Sri Harinam Prabhu ki jai, Gaur Bhakta Vrinda ki jai.